All right, so we just watched the little episode of Jesus Was an Episcopalian about connection with a 5-minute fastest ever overview of how it all hangs together. But I thought it was a pretty effective overview, which is why I thought we could watch it. Hopefully, for those of you who are unfamiliar with how kind of some of these pieces work, it gave you a little glimpse into it. I want to map this over here for us so that people can hold on to this. Now, some of you I know think this is like the coolest and most fascinating thing ever, and you're going to have like tons of questions. When I say who has a question, there's like 6 of you who are going to have your hands up. And there's like 20 of you who are like, who cares? And I get it. So for those 6 of you, rock on. For the 20 of you, I'm going to do my best to try to make this interesting and relevant for you, but you're probably this just is not your thing, and that's okay too. And I just want you to have the barest, most essential bits of information so that you feel like you understand how it is that the Episcopal Church works. All right. I think the best place to start is with the word bishop, with the idea of bishops. Bishops are the organizing principle of the Episcopal Church. And that makes sense because the word Episcopal means, it's Greek for bishop. So our organizing or ordering principle is a bishop. And that is in the sense that where there is a bishop, there is connection with antiquity, with tracing the church back to, like we did last week with that, and now you have this sort of like, apostolic succession chart. But remember last week when I was here and I got you all lined up, you kind of get a sense when you have bishops, you have a connection with antiquity, but you also have a connection one with another. So the bishop is the one who's in relationship with all the people. A bishop is primarily meant to be a pastor. We don't practice that very well here, but that's beside the point. A bishop is meant to be a pastor for an area. All right, so where you have a bishop, there you have the church. Where you have a bishop, there you have a diocese. So a diocese is a geographic region of the church. This is an effort to make the church manageable, relatable. It's all about fostering relationship, having the church just not be so huge that people don't have any way of connecting with one with another, but to be manageable in its size. So a diocese is a geographic region under the authority of one bishop. So we are in the diocese of. The geographic region is not just the city of Dallas, it is Dallas and essentially everything north to Oklahoma and east to Texarkana. So if you can just imagine that swath of North Texas. The other 5 dioceses in the state of Texas, there's 6 total in Texas. The Diocese of Texas, which is Houston and Austin and Waco, East Texas. The Diocese of West Texas, which is San Antonio, the Rio Grande Valley, and over. The Diocese of Fort Worth, which is Fort Worth and everything west over until you get underneath the Panhandle. And then the Panhandle is the Diocese of Northwest Texas. And then all the way over in El Paso is the Diocese of the Rio Grande. And the Rio Grande, Diocese of the Rio Grande is actually El Paso and then up through New Mexico. 6 in Texas alone. Because when Texas was established as a missionary area, it was hard for bishops to get around. And so they wanted it to be that like that. Does that make sense? Some dioceses are whole states. Alaska is a diocese. Poor bugger. The Bishop of Alaska flies everywhere because he can't drive there. Arizona, you name it. Virginia has a number of dioceses. Florida has a bunch of different dioceses. Does that make sense? It's an effort by the church to create an area where one single bishop can be in charge and oversee that area. Now, as the video pointed out, sometimes a bishop in a diocese will have assisting bishops. I'm going to geek out a little bit. I'm going to tell you what they can be called. You can elect bishops suffragan, a bishop who is under the authority of another bishop in a diocese. Those bishops are elected by that diocese. We have elected bishops suffragan in this diocese in the past. The last bishop suffragan that the Diocese of Dallas elected was none other than Paul Lambert, who was a curate under that man. So, really remarkable. And so the Diocese of Dallas had its bishop, and then they elected another bishop to help him. A bishop can invite another person who's already ordained a bishop to come and hang out and be an assisting bishop too. And we tend to do a lot of that from Canada these days, if you didn't know. Yes. So right now, well, in North Dakota, but that's, almost Canada. So our assisting bishop is a lovely man named Michael Smith. He really is quite lovely, who is now formerly the bishop of North Dakota. And we also have a former bishop of a province in Canada. I can't even remember what it's called. And he is now the bishop he's now the rector of the church in I don't know, like Mineola or something, and also he's a bishop. And we, of course, have the bishop rector at Incarnation. But we have assisting bishops to help out. What do bishops do? Anybody? This isn't a rhetorical question like, what do they do? It's more like, what do they do? They confirm.
That's about it.
That's about it. Way to go. Nice, Rick. I love it. Yeah, so again, this is, if you can remember there is a symbolic element to it. They're a unifying principle. They do go around confirming, and i.e. literally, physically, laying hands on and being a physical connection to antiquity. They're also supposed to be pastoral. They're supposed to have pastoral relationships with all of the rectors and vicars in the diocese. They're supposed to organize and plant churches and galvanize and energize and manage the staff. And the staff is supposed to get out there and support. A healthy functioning diocese is oriented around a bishop, and sometimes it takes more than one bishop. The Diocese of Texas, which is a huge diocese with 170 churches, has 4 bishops. Takes that many to lead that diocese. So a healthy diocese can need a lot of bishops in order to do all that work. All right. A diocese is comprised of churches, right? Primarily. There are schools. Sometimes there are hospitals. But just for the sake of simplicity, a diocese is comprised of churches. Churches can be of 2 types. What types of churches are there? Parishes and missions. Y'all are awesome. What's the difference between a parish and a mission?
A mission has a vicar.
A mission has a vicar. Nice. And a parish has a what? Has a rector. Or, in the case of a cathedral parish, a dean. A parish, this is where the Episcopal Church shows some of its, this is where we are not like some other denominations or churches, Roman Catholic and otherwise. The different dioceses can set different standards by which a church is either a parish or a mission. The general standard is that if a church can afford a full-time ordained leader, it's a parish. If a church cannot afford a full-time ordained leader, it's a mission. But that's not always true. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. It's not always true. A mission is technically under the direct authority of the bishop. A parish is under the authority of the rector, who is installed, who is elected or called by that church, but is technically installed by the bishop, but functions essentially as the bishop's designated leader, and has a pretty significant amount of autonomy to lead that church according to her or his will.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah, indeed. Amen. Amen. Mission churches, and in a parish, what is the elected body?
Vestry.
The vestry. And we'll get into that in a minute. In a mission, it's called a bishop's committee. And the bishop can appoint people to the bishop's committee. I can't appoint people to the vestry. The vestry is elected. Now, I'm on a tangent here because I think this is a point worth making at Transfiguration, which is not necessarily the same as how many of you have some or a lot of experience in other Episcopal churches. Okay, there's enough of you. So we did the election last month. Last month. You may have noticed that when we were electing the vestry, we presented a slate. We presented the exact number of people to the amount of openings on the vestry. That is common in larger churches, is less common in small and mid-sized churches. The reason we do that is not to take the sort of like democratic impulse or instinct away from the congregation. It is because in a church of this size, it's harder to know everybody. And it's harder to know what everybody's skills are. And in a church of this size, we need the vestry to have certain skills in order to lead certain committees and aspects of our life. And when you have 1,300 members, you might not know what people's particular skills are, let alone what the church's particular leadership needs are next year. So we have this committee of about almost 18 people this year who took that project on and created a slate and did all that work in a really transparent way. But when it comes to the election day, it's like, well, I'm not really electing. I mean, you're telling me who we're electing. It's because a process of parishioners help us get to that point. In other churches, you might have a slate. I mean, you might be electing 4 people, and you might have 6 or 8 or 10 people on the ballot. And then it's then it's a free for all. It's a significant election. And there's lots of runoffs, and those elections can be quite time consuming. Bishops' committees are typically appointed by the bishop. Okay, so this is, I know I'm down deep in the weeds up for people who, the 20 of y'all who are like, I don't care, really. All right. Yes?
Where does priest fit in?
A priest? What a great question. How many of you have had that question too? But where are the priests in this? Okay, a priest, think of it like a doctor is what you are, and then when you go to take on a job at a hospital, you are Dr. So-and-so, but your job is not just doctor. Your job is, whatever, internist or, ER, blah, blah, blah. You have a job. It's the same exact thing. So a priest is what I became through ordination. But my job is not to be priest. My job is to be rector or associate rector or chaplain or whatever. Then I have a job.
Or bishop.
Or bishop. A bishop, it was a priest. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Same with deacons. Deacons are deacons and then they have jobs. So Jenny is our deacon for pastoral care. Yeah.
Hold on, so bishops aren't priests anymore?
No. I'm not a deacon anymore. You'll hear some people say, once a deacon, always a deacon. You're not going to hear that from me. And that's no knock on deacons at all. And that's, for bishops, when you are ordained to something new, I think you stop being the thing you were.
What is the title of the bishop? Is it not father?
Generally, it would be bishop. So I've heard, actually a friend of mine is a bishop, and he said, about a year after he got ordained a bishop, we were like, what's the thing that has changed most? And he said, I lost my first name. Now I'm just called bishop. No one calls me by my name, they just call me bishop. And he says, I miss my name. So, and I think that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
How about there's the Reverend?
So you would,
Reverend.
yeah, so these are great questions.
Writing, though. You use that just in writing, not
Yeah.
spoken language.
Very reverend. Most reverend. I want to be the most reverend.
The Reverend.
Casey.
Yes.
No, you're the Reverend.
Yes. So the Reverend is what you become by virtue of ordination. The Right Reverend is what you become by, and the Reverend applies to deacon and priest alike. These are written titles. These are not spoken address. So in the Episcopal Church, we don't typically call people Reverend so-and-so. They are Mr. or Mrs. or father or mother. In the case of my wife really wants the Episcopal Church to come up with gender neutral. And so she is passionately advocating that we all just call everybody pastor. So she goes by pastor. My wife is also a priest, and she does not prefer mother. She wants the title to be equal. Mother to her is something a nun is, and father signifies priest. And she's like, so let's use neither. Let's just call everybody pastor, and then there's no more gendered stuff. I'm like, well, there's something to that. But that's for a different day. The Reverend is what you are as a written title. When you write your state representative, senator, congressman, you write the honorable. But when you meet that person, you don't call them honorable so-and-so. That's your written title. You call them Mr. or congressman or representative or whatever. In the same way, these are written titles. The Reverend is a deacon or a priest. The Right Reverend is a bishop. The Very Reverend is a dean of a school, a dean of a cathedral. I see some, I would say, very pretentious priests who are deans of local convocations, that is, little subsets. Think of it like a county within a diocese. A convocation is like a little county within a diocese, and they can sometimes have deans and deans of these who get elected to like one-year terms, and they'll take on the Very Reverend because they're just so pretentious. I'm sorry, I'm just telling you how I feel.
Tell us how you really feel.
I just have no time for that. In the same way that I don't have any time for people who put doctor on their title, the Reverend Doctor, when they're not a PhD. I just can't even. Like, I've got a doctor of ministry. I don't have a PhD. It's not a PhD. It's not the same thing. I didn't have to do anything close to the amount of work that a PhD had to do to get my doctorate. No, I'm proud of it. Don't get me wrong. And so you'll see D-Man at the end of my name sometimes. I'm really proud of it, but don't ever call me doctor, because I'm not a doctor. I'm sorry. I'm down the rabbit hole. And then you have the Most Reverend. And the Most Reverend is the bishop's title reserved for archbishops, or in the case of the Episcopal Church, the presiding bishop is our version of the archbishop. We don't call him archbishop. I don't really actually know the history of why we decided not to call the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church an archbishop, but that's essentially what that person is. And they are they're the Most Reverend. The Most Reverend. That is Michael Curry right now. Yes, please.
What about canons?
Canons. Yeah, thank you.
And Archdeacon Rosemary is she the Very Reverend, I think? No,
I don't think so.
I feel like her title is not just the Reverend. Anyway, I don't know.
A canon is a person appointed to a specific position by a bishop or a priest who is on a cathedral staff. So if you are but you don't. If you're a bishop, if you're a priest on a cathedral staff, you're not automatically a canon. I was a priest on a bishop staff. I mean, on a cathedral staff, and I was not a canon. So you can be appointed by the dean, or in proxy for the bishop, to the post of canon. All this is like old English stuff.
It happened at our previous parish. We went to the cathedral, and a new priest came, Holly, and the dean made her canon presenter or something like that.
Yeah. All right. So again, like 6 of you care about this stuff, but I just want you to all know what it all is, okay? So you can call me Father. You can call me Mr. You can call me just Casey is fine. Don't call me Doctor. And really, I mean, according to all this sort of like tradition, you wouldn't call me Reverend. Okay, does that make sense?
Something that you
It doesn't matter. Like, it's okay. But just if you're a person who cares about this stuff. Yes, Norma.
Is there anybody above the bishop?
No.
That's the top.
In the Episcopal Church, through the Anglican Church, bishops are it. Archbishops are the senior bishop in a province, and a province is a collection of churches within a larger geographic area. A province is usually a national church, or a church, a paranational church. Like the Episcopal Church is actually not. We sometimes call it the national church. People who've been Episcopalians for a long time, sometimes we call it the national church level or whatever, which is not actually true, because it's more than the United States. The Episcopal Church is 11 countries, and so it's not a national church in the sense that it's much more than the United States. But most other parts of the Anglican Communion are within a single area, within a single country. And we will call that a province, and an archbishop is the senior bishop in that area. But they're still, like the video pointed out, they're essentially first among equals. They can convene meetings, they preside over meetings of bishops, but they can't really tell anybody what to do. And bishops, generally speaking, don't set doctrine. Convention does. That's what I want to get to next. Aren't you excited? We're talking about convention. I lost Natasha like 20 minutes ago. She's like, I came tonight. All right, General Convention is the gathering. When it is actually when it is convened, General Convention is the largest democratically elected legislative body in the world. There are roughly 1,100 to 1,200 elected people there delegating and conducting business. Roughly 800 to 900 of them are clergy and lay people elected by all of the dioceses. And then roughly 300 to 350 bishops. And bishops in our church are elected. That's very key. Bishops are elected, not appointed, with one exception. There's only one bishop who's appointed, the bishop for the armed services. But with that sole exception, every other bishop is elected. So at General Convention, there are roughly 800 what are called deputies, and 300 plus bishops. And the video pointed out that this structure, this bicameral structure, is reminiscent of something. The way that the Constitution establishes Congress. And the reason for that is because the same people who wrote our original Constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church were the same people who wrote the United States Constitution. And they were like, hey, we got a good idea. It works. Let's do it. This committee meeting will, yes. Well said. All right. So convention, General Convention meets once every 3 years. Every single diocese sends 8 deputies, 4 clergy, 4 lay. They meet along and in separate houses. The bishops and the deputies meet in separate houses, and for 11 or 12, for some people, really energizing, life-giving, dynamic, procedurally filled days. For other people, like mind-numbingly, procedurally exhausting, Robert's Rules numbing days. I won't tell you which one I am. They meet and conduct the work of the church. Whether it is passing like the budget for 3 years of the whole church, like how much money are we going to spend on planting new churches and new church initiatives? How much money are we going to spend on the methods that we communicate? How much money are we going to spend on, you name it, different facets of the life of the church at a big church level? You'll sometimes hear it called, instead of, because we used to call it the national church and everybody's like, wait, we got to stop calling it that, we got 11 nations. We just call it the You'll sometimes just hear it called TEC now.
Houston or something like that?
Yeah, or tech. You'll sometimes hear it called tech. That hasn't caught on yet. All right, so the Episcopal Church. They meet together and they talk about issues of doctrine. The Episcopal Church is where the church experiences its evolution on a matter like women's ordination or the ordination of same-sex people in same-sex relationships, or the General Convention is where we pass, where the idea of prayer book revision starts, happens, and then essentially reaches its culmination with the approval of modifications. Everything we pray, everything that gets published, everything that we have in any of our different volumes, whether it's the hymnal, the prayer book, any of the supplements to the hymnal, to the prayer book, all come from here. Yes?
So, for example, the expansive language that we're using in worship now came from the most recent convention.
Great example. And that actually shows how the Episcopal Church works as a sort of mostly democratic institution. And I say mostly in the sense that it's more of a republic rather than a strict democracy, if you remember your sort of like, politics or government class. The church was, people in the church, in the wider church in different parts, were wrestling with like this issue of like gendered language in the prayer book, and some of this sort of patriarchy in the prayer book. And so some people were really wanting to like take the prayer book and chuck it and redo it. And other people were like, we are going to literally light ourselves on fire if you chuck the prayer book out. And so like you got this camp over here is like, burn it all down, burn down the patriarchy, and these other people are like, I'm going to literally like light myself on fire if you do that again. So and the most of the Episcopal Church is like somewhere in the middle. And so at General Convention, I would say cooler heads prevailed and said, I think we can kind of do both until we figure out what we need to do next. And so there was a revision that was put out for what's called trial use. And that's what we're doing with expansive language. Modest changes to give the whole Episcopal Church time to figure out really what it wants to do. And at that time, General Convention will initiate a process to change the prayer book. And that takes 2 consecutive General Conventions. All right, now I've really lost a whole bunch of you. All right. All right. We are governed by primarily 3 things. Bishops, Constitution / canons. And canons, it's a different canon law, not canon people. And most importantly, we pray, I'm super out of time, we pray using the prayer book, and it also really tells us what we believe about things. The rubrics, all that text that's not the language we say, all the parts that, if you've ever really like thumbed through a prayer book, all those parts that most of us skip over most of the time, the stuff at the beginning of a liturgy or the stuff at the end of a liturgy, the stuff at the very beginning of the prayer book and the stuff, some of it at the very end of the prayer book, a lot of that stuff is really, really important to tell us how to do things and what to do and the responsibilities we have. It's not a strict governing document, but it does say a lot about how the church works. So these three things in tandem it's not bishops, it's General Convention, are the three things that govern us. General Convention, the Constitution and Canons, and the prayer book. Those three things are how it works. All right, I'm going to stop with the super boring government lesson. We have a couple minutes for questions. I wonder what questions you have. Please.
When was the last time we had a deputy to General Convention from this parish?
Oh, I don't know. Well, Anne was an alternate. Anne Schmidt was an alternate at last General Convention because she was elected as second alternate, and then she was elected as third alternate, and then the second alternate got sick and couldn't go, so she went. And she actually got on the floor one day. She was not one of the four elected. Rebecca will be there potentially. I think you're second alternate. So again, if any of the clergy ahead of her move to a different diocese, something happens and they can't take 2 weeks off or whatever, Rebecca will get on the floor. Now, Bishop Sumner is unlikely to let her on the floor in any sort of particularly contentious vote. But we stand a good chance of having Rebecca. So it can actually happen. Yeah. It doesn't happen. But it wouldn't happen if it was appointed. That's actually the beauty of us electing. Yeah, please.
I actually have two questions.
Uh-huh.
The first one is everything you put before, because I was reading the House of Bishop, and I forgot the other name of the House of, where they put things in front of the convention about possibly changing ceremonies or altars.
House of Deputies and House of Bishops.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Is everything decided in 1 year? I know you said that at times they'll try things to see how they go, but is everything settled in that year? Because if you're going through reading them, I'm thinking, they decide on fall.
Yeah, they do. But then in between General Convention and the intervening years, they have what are called standing committees who then have to figure out the how and the implementation of it. So General Convention will have to pass the legislation in those essentially 10 days. And then the standing committees sometimes are left with the job of now what? So prayer book is a good example. The General Convention might say, we want more liturgies on helping people who get divorced. Well, in the 10 days of General Convention, they're not going to write that liturgy. They'll kick it to the standing committee, who over the next year or two will write it, present it to the next General Convention and say, General Convention, do you like what we created? And General Convention will say either yes or no. That kind of deal.
So, may I also understand that anyone can go?
Yes, anyone can go.
And they can go and listen, go and
Yes,
participate?
you can go and get on what's called in the gallery to observe. You can attend hearings that are open to the public. Some hearings take what's the word I'm looking for? Not testimony, but where you can come up and speak. Some hearings are they're not going to take remarks or whatever. We went to the last General Convention, and a whole bunch of us showed up and spoke at one of the hearings that was extremely important. And so yes, you can absolutely go. The next one is in Baltimore. We showed up in force because it was in Austin. The most recent one was in Austin, so we drove down there. Yeah. I think last question.
The relationship between the 800 deputies and the bishops when they vote, do they each get one vote? So is it like best out of 1,100? Or is there an oath?
Senate, House of Representatives. Think of it like the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Bishops then edit what's been passed by the deputies?
So something that's passed by the House of Deputies, the bishops can amend or revise, and then it has to go back. It's just like what you learned about, like when you're in middle school about how. I'm sorry?
Are there vetoes?
There's no vetoes, but the deputies could pass something and the bishops could vote it down. The bishops could pass something and the deputies could vote it down. Or they can amend it, and when it comes back in its amended form, it could not pass. Usually what happens is if something passes significantly in this house, it's going to pass in some shape or form in this house and vice versa. Usually. This is also where we get the presiding bishop. The House of Bishops elects its presiding bishop at General Convention once every 9 years. All right. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but I'll hang out afterwards. I know this was like some of y'all, your worst nightmare from high school, but I just want to give you some basic information about how it works, okay? And thank you for listening.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
What were the dioceses in Texas? I missed one.
Texas,
No, diocese.
Dallas,
No, okay. Texas, Dallas,
Fort Worth,
okay.
West Texas, Northwest Texas,
Northwest Texas,
and Rio Grande,
okay.
and Rio Grande,
Okay.
and Rio Grande.
Okay.